The sound of hoofbeats thundered behind Catherine Coleman as she urged her exhausted mare deeper into the wilderness, the setting sun casting long shadows across the rugged terrain of the Wyoming Territory. It was 1876, and she had been riding for nearly 2 days straight, stopping only when absolutely necessary. Her once fine blue dress was torn and muddied, her dark hair falling loose from its pins, and her hands blistered from clutching the reins so tightly. But she couldn't stop. Not when her own father and brothers would kill her if they caught her. The wound in her side had started bleeding again. The makeshift bandage she'd fashioned from a torn petticoat now stained crimson. Catherine's vision blurred as she swayed in the saddle. The mare, sensing her rider's weakening grip, slowed to a walk despite Catherine's desperate urging. "Just a little further, girl," she whispered, patting the horse's lathered neck. "Just until we find somewhere safe." But safety seemed an impossible dream as the rocky terrain gave way to a dense copse of trees. The temperature was dropping with the sun, and Catherine knew she couldn't ride through the night again. Not in her condition. She needed shelter, water, and rest. As if in answer to her unspoken prayer, a thin curl of smoke rose above the trees less than a mile ahead. Catherine hesitated. Smoke meant people, and people meant danger. But the alternative was bleeding out alone in the wilderness. With no other choice, she guided her mare toward the smoke. As she approached, she saw a small cabin nestled against the hillside, its windows glowing with warm lamplight. A corral held several horses, and a barn stood nearby. It looked peaceful, ordinary nothing like the Grand Coleman ranch she'd fled. Her mare stumbled, and Catherine nearly fell from the saddle. She knew she had no choice now. Either she took her chances with whoever dwelled in that cabin, or she died here, alone. With the last of her strength, she urged the horse forward. They had barely reached the edge of the clearing when Catherine's vision darkened around the edges. She felt herself slipping sideways, heard her own voice cry out weakly. And then there was only darkness. Ethan Yates had been chopping wood when he heard the approach of a horse. Living this far from town meant visitors were rare, and unexpected ones were often trouble. He set down his axe and reached for the rifle that was never far from his side. Standing perfectly still, he listened. One horse, moving slowly. Not the sound of raiders or outlaws. Still, caution had kept him alive for 30 years in this untamed land. He moved silently to the edge of the clearing, positioning himself behind a large pine. What he saw surprised him: a woman, barely conscious on a nearly spent horse. Even in the fading light, he could see the dark stains spreading across her side. As he watched, she swayed and then fell, hitting the ground with a soft thud that made him wince. The mare stood beside her fallen rider, too exhausted to even shy away. Ethan moved quickly, crossing the clearing in long strides. The woman lay crumpled on the ground, her face pale beneath smudges of dirt. Blood seeped through her dress at the waist. "Miss, can you hear me?" he asked, kneeling beside her. Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Ethan glanced around the darkening forest. Whoever had done this to her might still be following. He needed to get her inside. With gentle movements, he lifted her, noting how she whimpered in pain despite being unconscious. She was light in his arms, though her sodden skirts added uncomfortable weight. The mare followed docilely as he carried the woman toward the cabin. Inside, he laid her on his bed and quickly assessed her condition. The wound in her side appeared to be from a bullet that had grazed her rather than lodged inside. That was fortunate, but she'd lost a lot of blood, and fever was setting in. After tending to her horse, ensuring the animal had water and feed, Ethan returned to the unconscious woman. He gathered clean cloths, his small supply of medicines, and a basin of water. With careful hands, he cut away the blood-soaked fabric around her wound. "What kind of trouble are you in, miss?" he murmured as he cleaned the angry gash. "And who's looking for you?" For 3 days, Catherine drifted in and out of consciousness. When fever claimed her, she thrashed and cried out about her father, begging someone named Thomas not to tell. In her lucid moments, she was wary and silent, watching Ethan with fearful eyes as he changed her bandages or coaxed her to sip broth. On the 4th morning, Ethan was making coffee when he heard movement from the bed. He turned to find the woman fully awake, attempting to sit up. "Easy now," he said, keeping his voice gentle. That wound needs more time to heal. She froze at the sound of his voice, her eyes wide with fear. Who are you? Where am I? My name's Ethan Yates. This is my cabin. You collapsed at the edge of my property 4 days ago, bleeding and half dead. He poured a cup of coffee and approached slowly, like he would a spooked colt. I've been tending to your wound. It's healing well, but you lost a lot of blood. She glanced around the cabin, taking in the sparse furnishings, the table and 2 chairs, the stone fireplace, the shelves lined with books that seemed out of place in such a rustic setting. My horse? She asked, her voice hoarse. She's fine, resting in the barn with plenty of feed. Ethan offered the coffee. Mind telling me your name, miss? And how you came to be shot? She hesitated, then took the cup with trembling hands. Catherine, she said after a moment. Catherine Coleman. Coleman? Ethan's brow furrowed. Any relation to Harold Coleman over in Sweetwater County? The coffee cup shook so violently in her hands that some spilled onto the blanket. He's my father, she whispered, and the fear in her eyes deepened. Ethan knew Harold Coleman by reputation, a wealthy rancher with political ambitions and a reputation for ruthlessness. The man had 3 sons who were said to be just as hard as their father. Your father do that to you? Ethan nodded toward her bandaged side. Catherine looked away, her fingers clutching the cup like a lifeline. My brother, Thomas, father ordered it. The simple statement hung in the air between them. Ethan had heard of men doing terrible things, but ordering the shooting of one's own daughter was beyond comprehension. Why? He asked quietly. I refused to marry the man he chose for me. Catherine's voice was barely audible. Senator William Porter. He's 63 years old and has buried 3 wives already. Father said the alliance would help his political aspirations. She looked up at Ethan, her green eyes fierce despite her weakness. I would rather die than be that man's wife. So you ran? Yes. Thomas. He was supposed to escort me to Porter's ranch. I begged him to help me escape instead. She gave a bitter laugh. He agreed, then betrayed me. Shot me when I tried to flee. I managed to get on my horse and ride. She closed her eyes briefly. I've been riding for days. I don't even know where I am now. You're in the northwest corner of Wyoming territory, about 20 miles from the Montana border, and a good 150 miles from Sweetwater. Ethan moved to sit in the chair beside the bed. No one comes out this way much. It's just me and my horses here. Are you going to turn me in? Catherine asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. My father will pay handsomely. Ethan studied her for a long moment. I'm not in the habit of sending women back to men who want them dead, Miss Coleman, money or no. The relief that washed over her face was so profound that tears sprang to her eyes. She quickly blinked them away, but not before Ethan noticed. Thank you, she whispered. Ethan nodded and stood. You should rest. We'll figure out what to do next when you're stronger. Over the next week, Catherine regained her strength gradually. The wound in her side healed cleanly, thanks to Ethan's careful tending. She learned that he had been an army medic during the war before settling in this remote area to breed and train horses. On her 8th day at the cabin, Catherine insisted on getting up and helping with chores, despite Ethan's protests. I won't be a burden, she said firmly, standing beside the bed in the oversized shirt and trousers Ethan had provided. Her own dress, beyond salvaging, had been burned. If I'm to stay here, I need to earn my keep. Ethan regarded her with a mixture of admiration and concern. Your wound's still healing. Pushing too hard won't help either of us. I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Yates. Ethan, he corrected. If you're staying, we might as well use our given names. Catherine nodded, a slight smile playing at her lips. Ethan, then, and you must call me Catherine. He agreed, though privately he thought her name too formal for the woman standing before him in borrowed clothes, her dark hair hanging in a simple braid over her shoulder. She looked younger than he'd initially thought, perhaps 22 or 23 to his 30. You can help with the cooking, he conceded. And maybe some light work around the cabin, but nothing strenuous until that wound is fully healed. Catherine proved to be not only determined, but capable. Despite her upbringing as the daughter of a wealthy rancher, she knew how to cook simple meals, mend clothing, and keep a home in order. She explained that her mother, who had died when Catherine was 16, had insisted she learn practical skills despite her father's objections. Mother said a woman should never be completely dependent on others, Catherine told Ethan one evening as they sat by the fire after supper. Father thought it was a waste of time. He wanted me to learn only enough to oversee servants, not to do the work myself. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. Catherine smiled, the firelight softening her features. She was. I think she would have approved of my running away, though perhaps not of getting shot in the process. Ethan chuckled. Few mothers would approve of that part. As days turned into weeks, they developed a comfortable routine. Ethan worked with his horses during the day, while Catherine tended to the cabin and garden. In the evenings, they shared meals and conversation by the fire. Sometimes Ethan read aloud from one of his books, a collection that surprised Catherine with its breadth and quality. How does a horse trainer in the wilderness come to have a library that would make a Boston scholar envious? She asked one night. Ethan set down the volume of Whitman's poetry he'd been reading. I wasn't always a horse trainer in the wilderness, he said simply. When he didn't elaborate, Catherine didn't press. They all had pasts they preferred not to discuss. Still, she found herself increasingly curious about the man who had saved her life. Ethan Yates was unlike any man she had ever known. Tall and lean, with sun-browned skin and eyes the color of a storm-tossed sea, he moved with the quiet confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. His hands were calloused from work, yet gentle when tending to wounded animals or changing her bandages. He spoke little of himself, but listened intently when she talked, as though her words mattered. More than once Catherine had caught herself watching him as he worked with the horses in the corral, admiring the fluid strength of his movements and the way the animals responded to his calm authority. It unsettled her, this growing awareness of him as a man rather than simply her rescuer. June gave way to July, bringing heat that shimmered above the land and turned the cabin into an oven by midday. They took to doing chores in the early morning and late afternoon, spending the hottest hours in the shade of the large oak beside the creek that ran behind the property. It was during one of these afternoon respites that Catherine finally asked the question that had been on her mind for weeks. Why do you live out here alone, Ethan? He was whittling a piece of wood, his knife moving in sure, steady strokes. He didn't look up as he answered. It suits me. But doesn't it get lonely? The nearest town is 2 days' ride away. Ethan was silent for so long that Catherine thought he wouldn't answer. Then he set down his knife. After the war, I found it hard to be around people. Too much noise, too many memories. He looked at her then, his expression unreadable. Out here, there's peace. The horses don't care what I did or didn't do. They just want fair treatment and a steady hand. What did you do? Catherine asked softly. During the war? I was a medic with the Union Army, saw more death than any man should. His eyes took on a distant look. When you can't save them when they die looking at you, begging you to help, it stays with you. Catherine reached out impulsively and laid her hand on his. I'm sorry. Ethan glanced down at their hands, then back at her face. Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. Don't be, the war's long over. He turned his hand beneath hers so their palms met, his fingers curling around hers briefly before he pulled away and stood. We should check on that mare that's due to foal any day now. The moment passed, but something had changed between them. Catherine felt it in the way Ethan sometimes looked at her when he thought she wouldn't notice, in the way their hands occasionally brushed while working together, in the growing silence that was not uncomfortable but charged with unspoken things. July melted into August. Catherine's wound had healed completely, leaving only a pink scar as a reminder of her narrow escape. She no longer had the excuse of injury to explain her continued presence at Ethan's cabin, yet neither of them mentioned her leaving. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Ethan cleared his throat. I need to make a trip into town for supplies, he said. We're running low on flour and coffee, and I need to mail a letter to a potential buyer for one of the colts. Catherine nodded, trying to ignore the twist of anxiety in her stomach. When will you go? Tomorrow, if the weather holds. I'll be gone 3 or 4 days. He glanced at her. Will you be all right here alone? The concern in his voice warmed her. I'll be fine. I know how to use a rifle if needed, and no one comes this way anyhow. Ethan nodded, though he didn't look entirely convinced. I've been thinking, it might be safer if we let people believe you're my wife. Catherine's head snapped up, her cheeks flushing. Your wife? Just for appearances, he added quickly. If anyone asks in town, I'll say I married recently. It would explain your presence here better than the truth, and it might discourage your father's men if they come looking. The logic was sound, but Catherine couldn't deny the flutter of something like disappointment at his practical explanation. That makes sense, she said evenly. What should I call myself then? Catherine Yates would be simplest, less to remember if questioned. Ethan's voice was matter of fact, but he wouldn't quite meet her eyes. Catherine Yates, she repeated softly, testing the name on her tongue. It felt strangely right, which unsettled her more than she cared to admit. Ethan left at dawn the next morning, his pack horse loaded with empty sacks to be filled with supplies in town. Catherine stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching until horse and rider disappeared into the trees. The next 4 days stretched endlessly. Catherine kept busy with chores, tending to the garden and the horses, but the cabin felt empty without Ethan's quiet presence. She found herself speaking aloud to the animals just to break the silence. On the afternoon of the 4th day, she was hanging laundry on the line when she heard the approach of horses more than one, moving at a steady pace rather than the careful tread she associated with Ethan's return. Catherine froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. Moving quietly, she slipped inside the cabin and retrieved the loaded rifle Ethan kept above the door. She positioned herself by the window, partially hidden by the curtain, but with a clear view of the clearing. 3 riders emerged from the trees, rough-looking men with the hard expressions of those accustomed to violence. They weren't her father's men. She would have recognized them. But something about their demeanor raised the hairs on the back of her neck. The lead rider, a broad-shouldered man with a week's growth of beard, reined in his horse and surveyed the cabin. "Looks like nobody's home, boys," he called to his companions. "Yates keeps good horses," said another, a thin man with a pockmarked face. "Shame to let them go to waste while he's in town." Horse thieves. Catherine's grip tightened on the rifle. Ethan's livelihood depended on those horses. The third man, younger than the others, was already moving toward the corral where the prize breeding stock was kept. Catherine stepped onto the porch, the rifle raised to her shoulder. "That's far enough, gentlemen," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. "This property is occupied, and you're not welcome here." The men turned in surprise. The leader recovered first, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Well, well, what have we here? Yates didn't mention he had such pretty company." He touched the brim of his hat in mock politeness. "Madam, we're just passing through, looking to maybe purchase some horseflesh. Is the master of the house available?" "My husband is expected back any moment," Catherine lied, not lowering the rifle. "He won't take kindly to finding strangers near his stock." "Husband?" The man's eyes narrowed as he studied her. "Funny, I never heard Yates had married. When did this happy event occur?" "Recently enough that it's none of your business," Catherine replied. "Now, I suggest you gentlemen be on your way before he returns." The thin man spat on the ground. "She's bluffing, Hank. Yates is in town. I saw him myself yesterday. Won't be back till tomorrow at the earliest." Hank's smile widened, revealing a gold tooth. "Is that so? Well then, Mrs. Yates, if that's really who you are, we'll just help ourselves to a few horses." Considerate payment for Yates keeping such a pretty secret from his neighbors. He dismounted, and the others followed suit. Catherine's finger tensed on the trigger. "One more step and I'll shoot," she warned. Hank laughed. "You ever fired a gun before, Princess? It's not as easy as it looks, especially when the target shoots back." To emphasize his point, his hand moved to the revolver at his hip. The crack of a rifle shot split the air. Dirt sprayed up inches from Hank's boots. All 4 of them jumped, Catherine included, though she hadn't pulled the trigger. "The lady said you're not welcome here." Ethan's voice came from the tree line to the left of the cabin. He emerged from the shadows, his rifle trained on the intruders with unwavering precision. "Next shot won't be a warning," he continued, moving to stand beside Catherine on the porch. "And she wasn't lying about being my wife, Hank Billings. So not only are you trespassing and attempting to steal from me, you're threatening a married woman. That's 3 reasons to put a bullet in you." Hank's jovial demeanor vanished. "Now, Yates, we were just having some fun. No harm done. Get on your horses and ride out. Don't stop until you're well past my property line." Ethan's voice was cold. "And spread the word anyone who comes looking for trouble here will find more than they bargained for." The men mounted quickly, Hank throwing a venomous look over his shoulder as they rode away. Once they were out of sight, Catherine lowered her rifle, her hands shaking with delayed reaction. "I thought you weren't due back until tomorrow." "Got my business done quicker than expected." Ethan set his own rifle down and turned to her, his eyes searching her face. "Are you all right?" Catherine nodded, though her knees felt weak. "I'm fine." They hadn't done anything yet, but they would have. Ethan's jaw tightened. Hank Billings and his crew have been causing trouble all over the territory, stealing horses, robbing homesteads when the men are away. His eyes darkened. Sometimes worse, when they find women alone. The implication hung in the air, making Catherine shiver despite the warm day. "Then, I'm glad you came back early." Ethan reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch feather light. "So am I." Something passed between them in that moment, a current of awareness that neither could deny any longer. Catherine held her breath as Ethan's hand lingered near her cheek, his eyes searching hers. "I told them you were my wife," she whispered. "I heard." His voice was rough. It was quick thinking. It felt natural to say it. Ethan's expression softened. "Catherine..." Whatever he was about to say was interrupted by the sound of an approaching rider. They both tensed, Ethan reaching for his rifle again, but it was a familiar figure that appeared at the edge of the clearing, the postmaster's son from town, who occasionally delivered mail to outlying homesteads for an extra fee. The moment broken, Ethan stepped away to greet the young man, who handed over a small packet of letters. Catherine retreated into the cabin, her heart still racing from the confrontation with the would-be thieves and from whatever had nearly happened with Ethan. That evening, after they had unloaded the supplies Ethan had brought from town, an awkward tension lingered between them. Ethan was quieter than usual, lost in thought as they prepared and ate their supper. Catherine, too, found herself uncharacteristically silent, stealing glances at him when she thought he wouldn't notice. As she cleared the dishes, Ethan remained at the table, turning an envelope over in his hands. "I received a letter from a man named Porter," he said finally. Catherine nearly dropped the plate she was washing. "William Porter?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Ethan nodded grimly. "It seems your would-be husband has joined forces with your father in searching for you. The letter inquires if I've seen a young woman matching your description, offering a substantial reward for information." "How did they know to write to you?" Catherine's hands gripped the edge of the wash basin, her knuckles white. "They didn't, specifically. Porter says he's sent similar letters to every ranch and homestead within a 100-mile radius of where you were last seen." Ethan's eyes met hers. "They're casting a wide net, Catherine, and they're offering enough money to tempt even honest men." Catherine sank onto a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "What are you going to do?" The question hung in the air between them. Ethan studied her face for a long moment before he stood and crossed to the fireplace. Without a word, he tossed Porter's letter into the flames. "Nothing," he said as he watched the paper curl and blacken. "As far as I'm concerned, I've never seen Catherine Coleman." Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by guilt. "I've brought danger to your door, Ethan. Those men today, if they recognize me from any descriptions that have circulated, then we'll deal with it." Ethan returned to the table and sat across from her. "Catherine, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." She nodded, though apprehension tightened her chest. "Is there more to this story? Any other reason your father would go to such lengths to find you, beyond the failed marriage arrangement?" Catherine hesitated. She had told Ethan about her refusal to marry Porter, about her attempted escape and her brother's betrayal, but there was more, a secret she had carried alone for months. "Yes," she admitted finally, "there is more." She took a deep breath. "Before my father arranged the marriage to Porter, I had been seeing someone, a ranch hand named Michael. We had planned to marry, but when father found out, he fired Michael and announced my engagement to Porter the same day." Ethan's expression remained neutral. "Did you love this Michael?" "I thought I did, We had known each other since childhood. Catherine's hands twisted in her lap. But that's not the real reason Father is so determined to find me. It's because... She swallowed hard. I'm with child, Michael's child. Understanding dawned in Ethan's eyes. How far along? 4 months now. Catherine's hand moved unconsciously to her still flat stomach. Her loose clothing had hidden any subtle changes thus far. Father found out just before he arranged the marriage to Porter. He said Porter was willing to claim the child as his own after we wed, to avoid scandal. And if you refused, he threatened to send me to an institution for wayward women until the baby was born. Then take the child and tell everyone I had been away visiting relatives. Catherine's voice broke. I couldn't let that happen, so I ran. Ethan was silent for a long moment, processing this new information. Finally he asked, "And Michael? Does he know?" "No. Father sent him away before I discovered it myself. I don't even know where he is now." Catherine looked down at her clasped hands. "I understand if this changes things. If you want me to leave, leave?" Ethan's voice was sharp with surprise. "Why would I want that?" "Because I've lied to you. Because I'm carrying another man's child. Because my presence puts you in danger." Catherine looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Pick any reason?" Ethan reached across the table and took her hands in his. "Catherine, listen to me. You didn't lie, you just didn't tell me everything, which is your right. As for the child," his expression softened, "children are a blessing, regardless of the circumstances of their creation. And the danger," she whispered. "Life is dangerous," he said simply. "I'd rather face whatever comes with you here than wonder for the rest of my days what happened to you and your child." A tear slipped down Catherine's cheek. "Why are you so good to me, Ethan?" His thumb brushed away the tear. "Because you deserve goodness, Catherine, and because..." He hesitated, then continued softly, "because you've brought something to my life that I didn't know was missing." Their eyes held, and in that moment, Catherine realized what had been growing between them these past months was far more than gratitude or convenience. Whatever she had felt for Michael paled in comparison to the deep, steady emotion that Ethan stirred in her. The realization must have shown on her face, for Ethan's expression changed, becoming more intense. Slowly, as if giving her time to pull away, he leaned across the table. His lips met hers in a gentle kiss that nonetheless sent warmth spreading through her entire body. When they parted, Ethan's eyes searched hers. "I shouldn't have done that," he said, though he didn't sound particularly regretful. "Why not?" Catherine asked, her heart beating rapidly. "Because you're vulnerable. Because you're carrying another man's child. Because..." He sighed. "Because I don't want you to feel obligated in any way." Catherine reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "Ethan Yates, do I strike you as a woman who does things out of obligation?" A smile tugged at his lips. "No, you most certainly do not." "Good. Then believe me when I say I wanted that kiss. I've wanted it for some time now." Ethan captured her hand and pressed his lips to her palm. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't know," Catherine admitted, "but I'd like to find out. Together." As summer gave way to autumn, Catherine's condition became more apparent. The child within her grew strong, making its presence known with kicks and movements that never failed to bring a smile to her face. Ethan, true to his word, showed no resentment toward the life she carried. Instead, he began building a cradle from wood he'd been saving for something special. He expanded the small second room of the cabin, which had served as storage, into a proper bedroom with a window overlooking the creek. "The baby will need its own space eventually," he explained as he worked, "and until then, it can be a proper room for you." Though they had shared several more kisses since that night, Ethan had been careful to maintain propriety in their living arrangements. Catherine slept in his bed while he took a pallet near the fire, despite her protests that she was displacing him. "When we marry, if that's what you want, then we'll share," he told her one evening as they sat by the fire. But not before. The casual mention of marriage had stunned Catherine into momentary silence. Are you asking me, Ethan?" He looked up from the piece of leather he was working, his eyes serious. Not officially, not yet. You're still legally promised to Porter, and there's the matter of the child's father. Michael is gone, Catherine said firmly. And even if he weren't, what I felt for him wasn't. She struggled to find the words. It wasn't this. This? Ethan prompted, setting aside his work. Catherine met his gaze steadily. What I feel for you. It's deeper, stronger. She hesitated, then continued softly. I love you, Ethan. I think I have for some time now. The expression that crossed his face was one of wonder and disbelief, quickly followed by a joy so intense it transformed his features. He moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. I love you too, Catherine, more than I thought possible. His thumbs stroked the backs of her hands. When you're free of Porter, when the child is born, if you still feel the same, I would be honored to make you my wife, for real, not just for appearances. Catherine leaned forward and kissed him, pouring all her emotion into the gesture. When they parted, both breathless, she whispered, Yes, yes, I will marry you, Ethan Yates. The first snow fell in early November, dusting the landscape with white. Catherine, now visibly pregnant, found the cold weather limited her activities more than she liked. Ethan insisted she rest frequently and took over many of the household chores, in addition to caring for the horses and preparing for winter. You're doing the most important work already, he told her when she protested. Growing that little one takes strength. On a particularly cold evening, as they sat close by the fire after supper, a sound outside made them both freeze hoofbeats, approaching the cabin. Ethan was on his feet instantly, reaching for his rifle. Stay here, he instructed Catherine, moving to the window to peer into the darkness. Who is it? She whispered, one hand protectively covering her swollen belly. Ethan's face was grim. 3 riders. Too dark to see clearly, but they're not trying to be quiet. He handed Catherine a pistol from the shelf. If anything happens, take this and go out the back, into the trees. The hollow oak by the creek, you know it? She nodded, fear clutching at her heart. There are supplies hidden inside it, enough to get you to safety if needed. His eyes held hers for a brief moment. I love you. Remember that. Before she could respond, a voice called from outside. Yates, we know you're in there. Come out and talk. Catherine's blood ran cold. She knew that voice. Thomas, she whispered, it's my brother. Ethan's jaw tightened. Stay out of sight, he said, then moved to the door. Opening it just enough to be heard, but keeping his body shielded, Ethan called back, State your business. Coleman? We've come for my sister, Thomas Coleman replied. We know she's here. The postmaster's boy recognized her from the descriptions that have been circulating. Catherine closed her eyes briefly. The young man who had delivered the mail that day, he must have reported seeing her to her father's men. There's no one here but me, Ethan responded, his voice steady. And I don't take kindly to armed men on my property after dark. A different voice spoke up, older, authoritative. Mr. Yates, this is Harold Coleman. Catherine is my daughter, and she belongs with her family. Send her out, and we'll leave peacefully. Catherine rose to her feet, ignoring Ethan's warning glance. She moved to stand beside him at the door. I'm not going anywhere with you, father, she called out. You lost the right to call me daughter when you ordered Thomas to shoot me. There was a moment of silence outside, then Harold Coleman spoke again, his voice hard. Catherine, don't be foolish. You're coming home to fulfill your obligation to Senator Porter. He's been very patient considering your condition. Catherine's hand went instinctively to her belly. You told Porter about the baby? Of course, he's a practical man. The child will bear his name, which is more than it deserves. Ethan's free arm went around Catherine's shoulders, steadying her. Mr. Coleman, he called, your daughter isn't going anywhere she doesn't want to go. She's under my protection now. Harold Coleman's laugh was cold. Protection? From a horse trainer who lives in the wilderness? What kind of life can you offer her? A life of her own choosing, Ethan replied, which is more than you ever gave her. Enough of this, Thomas cut in. Catherine, come out now, or we'll come in and get you. Father has legal authority here, your promise to Porter in a binding contract. A contract I never signed, Catherine retorted. I'm staying here, Thomas, with Ethan. The man's bewitched her, the third rider spoke up. Catherine recognized her eldest brother, William. "We should burn them out." "No one is burning anything," came a new voice from the darkness. All heads turned as a fifth horseman rode into the clearing, the badge on his chest catching the light from the cabin. "Sheriff Davis," Harold Coleman acknowledged stiffly. "This is a family matter. When it involves threats of violence on a man's property, it becomes my matter," the sheriff replied. He dismounted and approached the cabin. "Evening, Yates," Ethan nodded. "Sheriff, didn't expect to see you out this way." "Got word there might be trouble." The sheriff's eyes moved to Catherine. "This the young lady in question?" "Yes," Ethan said. "Catherine Coleman, my fiancée." The sheriff raised an eyebrow, but didn't comment on the engagement. Instead, he turned to Harold Coleman. "Mr. Coleman, I understand you believe your daughter should return with you. However, Miss Coleman appears to be of age in making her own decisions." "She's promised in marriage to Senator William Porter," Harold insisted. "A legal contract, which she claims she didn't sign," the sheriff interrupted. "And even if she did, forcing a woman to marry at gunpoint isn't legal in this territory or any other I know of." "The child she carries is illegitimate," Thomas said, as though this justified their actions. "She's bringing shame on our family name." The sheriff's expression hardened. "The way I see it, gentlemen, shooting your own sister and hunting her down like an animal brings a lot more shame than a baby born out of wedlock." William Coleman started to protest, but the sheriff cut him off. "Here's what's going to happen. You three are going to turn around and ride back to wherever you're staying. Tomorrow, Miss Coleman will come to town with Mr. Yates, and we'll sort this matter out properly, with witnesses and legal documentation." His hand rested meaningfully on his holstered pistol. "Any objections?" Harold Coleman's face was a mask of barely controlled rage, but he recognized the authority of the law. "Fine. We'll see you in town tomorrow." "Catherine, this isn't over." The three Coleman men turned their horses and rode away into the darkness. Once they were gone, the sheriff turned back to Ethan and Catherine. "You two all right?" Ethan nodded, lowering his rifle. "Thank you, Sheriff, though I'm curious how you knew to come out here tonight." Sheriff Davis smiled slightly. "Let's just say I have sources who keep me informed. One of them mentioned the Coleman men asking questions about this place in town today." He glanced at Catherine. "I've heard stories about your father, Miss Coleman. None of them paint him as a man who takes no for an answer." "He isn't," Catherine confirmed, her hand still resting on her belly. "He'll try again. Which is why we need to get this settled legally, once and for all." The sheriff mounted his horse. "I'll escort you both to town tomorrow. Be ready to ride at first light." After the sheriff departed, Ethan closed and barred the door. Catherine sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. "Will it ever be over?" she whispered. "Will he ever let me go?" Ethan knelt before her, taking her trembling hands in his. "We'll end it tomorrow, whatever it takes. What if the contract is binding? What if the sheriff can't help us?" "Then we'll leave," Ethan said simply. "Go somewhere your father and Porter can't reach you. Canada, maybe, or California." Catherine stared at him. "You'd leave your home? Your horses?" "Home is where you are now, Catherine." He reached up to touch her face gently. "The rest is just land and buildings. We can start fresh somewhere else if we need to." Tears filled her eyes at the depth of his devotion. "I don't deserve you, Ethan Yates." He smiled, the corner of his eyes crinkling. "That's where you're wrong, Catherine Coleman. You deserve everything good this world has to offer. And I intend to spend my life making sure you get it." The ride to town the next morning was tense but uneventful. Sheriff Davis met them as promised and escorted them to the small building that served as both jail and courthouse in the frontier town of Pine Creek. To Catherine's surprise, a lawyer was waiting for them, Mr. Jenkins, a sharp-eyed man with spectacles who had traveled from the territorial capital specifically to address her case. "The governor has taken an interest in this matter," Jenkins explained as they gathered in the sheriff's office. "Senator Porter's involvement has elevated it beyond a simple family dispute." Catherine's heart sank. "Does that mean the governor supports Porter's claim?" "On the contrary," Jenkins smiled thinly. "Governor Harrison has concerns about a senator using his influence to essentially purchase a bride against her will. It reflects poorly on territorial governance, especially with statehood being considered." Hope flickered in Catherine's chest. "So, you're here to help me?" "I'm here to ensure the law is properly applied," Jenkins corrected, though his eyes were kind. "Now, tell me about this contract your father claims exists." Over the next hour, Catherine explained everything: her father's arrangement with Porter, her relationship with Michael, her pregnancy, her escape, and finally, her time with Ethan. Jenkins listened carefully, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. When she finished, he sat back and removed his spectacles, polishing them thoughtfully. "The legal situation is actually quite clear," he said finally. "If you didn't sign a marriage contract, it cannot be enforced against you. Even if your father signed as your guardian, you are of age now and can nullify such an arrangement." Relief washed over Catherine, but Jenkins held up a hand. "However, I should warn you that Senator Porter is not a man who accepts defeat gracefully. Your father, likewise, has a reputation for persistence." "Meaning?" Ethan asked, his voice tight. "Meaning that while the law is on your side, Miss Coleman, power and influence can sometimes circumvent legal processes. I would advise caution until this matter is fully resolved." The door to the sheriff's office opened, and Harold Coleman entered, followed by Thomas and a distinguished-looking older man whom Catherine immediately recognized as Senator William Porter. "Ah, I see we're all here," Jenkins said, rising to his feet. "Gentlemen, we were just discussing the legal standing of your claims regarding Miss Coleman." Porter stepped forward, his silver hair and expensive suit marking him as a man of means and position. His eyes swept over Catherine with a proprietary gaze that made her skin crawl. "My dear Catherine," he said, his voice oozing false concern, "you've led us on quite a chase, and in your condition too." His eyes flicked to her rounded belly with distaste. "Still, I am willing to honor our arrangement despite this complication." Ethan moved closer to Catherine, his protective stance unmistakable. Porter noticed and smiled thinly. "Mr. Yates, I presume. I understand you've been sheltering my fiancée. While I appreciate your chivalry, it's time for Catherine to fulfill her obligations." "The only obligation I have," Catherine said clearly, "is to myself and my child. I never agreed to marry you, Senator. I never signed any contract." "Your father signed on your behalf," Porter replied smoothly, "as was his right." Jenkins cleared his throat. "Actually, Senator, that's not accurate. Miss Coleman is 23 years old, well past the age where a father can legally bind his daughter in marriage without her consent. Moreover, forcing a woman into marriage against her will violates both territorial law and basic human decency." Harold Coleman's face darkened with anger. "This is absurd. Catherine belongs with her family and the husband we've chosen for her. This horse trainer has no claim on her." "On the contrary," Jenkins replied, "Miss Coleman has indicated her desire to marry Mr. Yates of her own free will. As she is a free adult, that is her right." "What about the child?" Thomas demanded. "It's illegitimate." "A bastard!" Ethan stepped forward, his eyes flashing dangerously. "That child will bear my name, as will its mother. There will be nothing illegitimate about either of them." The room fell silent at his declaration. Catherine looked up at him, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. Porter was the first to recover. "This is outrageous. Coleman, I expected you to handle this situation." He turned to Jenkins. "And you, does the governor know you're interfering in a private matter between a senator and his constituents?" "The governor specifically asked me to ensure that the law is followed," Jenkins replied calmly, "and the law is clear. Miss Coleman cannot be forced to marry anyone against her will." The standoff continued for several more minutes, with Harold Coleman and Senator Porter threatening legal action, political consequences, even financial ruin. But Jenkins remained unmoved, and Sheriff Davis made it clear he would enforce the law as written. Finally, Porter's patience snapped. "Keep the girl," he spat, "and the bastard she carries. But know this, Yates, you've made an enemy today. Both of you have." With that, he stormed out of the office. Harold Coleman lingered, his eyes fixed on Catherine. "You're no longer my daughter," he said coldly. "Don't ever attempt to contact your family again. As far as we're concerned, you died when you ran away." Though she had expected it, the words still cut deeply. Catherine straightened her spine and met his gaze. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Father, but I've found a new family now, one built on love, rather than obligation and fear." Harold turned and left without another word, Thomas following close behind. Once they were gone, Catherine released a shuddering breath, her hands trembling slightly. Ethan immediately wrapped an arm around her. "It's over," he murmured. "You're free?" Jenkins coughed discreetly. "Actually, there's one more matter to address." He pulled a document from his case. "If you two are serious about marriage, I took the liberty of preparing the necessary paperwork. Sheriff Davis is authorized to perform the ceremony, and I can witness it." Catherine and Ethan exchanged surprised glances. "Today?" Catherine asked. "Unless you'd prefer to wait," Jenkins replied. "Though, given the circumstances and the child's impending arrival, sooner might be better than later." Ethan took Catherine's hands in his. "It's your decision, Catherine. We can wait if you want a proper wedding." Catherine looked into the eyes of the man who had saved her in more ways than one, who had offered shelter when she was wounded, who had stood against her family, and a powerful senator, who loved her despite her past, and promised a future filled with acceptance and love. "I don't need a fancy ceremony," she said softly. "I just need you." And so, on that cold November day in 1876, in the sheriff's office of a small Wyoming town, Catherine Coleman became Ethan Yates. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, with Sheriff Davis reading the vows and Mr. Jenkins signing as witness. When Ethan kissed his bride, his hands gently cradling her face, Catherine felt a sense of rightness and belonging that she had never known before. This was home. This was family. This was love. The journey back to the cabin was filled with a quiet joy. They rode side by side, occasional glances and smiles passing between them that needed no words. The gold band on Catherine's finger caught the winter sunlight, a tangible symbol of the bond they had formalized, but that had been growing between them for months. As they approached the cabin, Ethan reached over and took Catherine's hand. "Welcome home, Mrs. Yates," he said, his voice warm with emotion. Catherine squeezed his hand, her heart full. "It's good to be home, Mr. Yates." That night, as they lay together as husband and wife for the first time, Catherine nestled against Ethan's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I was so afraid for so long," she whispered, "running, hiding, never feeling safe, until you." Ethan's arms tightened around her. "I remember the day you arrived, half dead on that exhausted mare, bleeding and unconscious." His hand moved to gently stroke her hair. "I had no idea you would change my life so completely. I recall waking up here, terrified you would send me back to my father." Catherine traced the line of his collarbone with her fingertips. "Instead, you sat beside me and told me I wasn't alone anymore. And you never will be again," Ethan promised, his lips finding hers in the darkness. 6 weeks later, on a snowy January night, Catherine went into labor. Ethan had arranged for the midwife from town to stay with them as the time approached, a wizened woman named Mrs. Holloway who had delivered more babies than she could count. The labor was long and difficult. Catherine's cries echoed through the cabin as Ethan paced anxiously, banished to the main room while Mrs. Holloway attended to his wife in their bedroom. Near dawn, after nearly 15 hours, a new cry joined Catherine's, the lusty wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Ethan froze, his heart pounding, until Mrs. Holloway appeared in the doorway, a small bundle in her arms. "Congratulations, Mr. Yates," she said, her weathered face creased in a smile. "You have a daughter, strong and healthy, just like her mother." Ethan took the tiny bundle with trembling hands. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and, when she blinked up at him, eyes that would likely turn as green as Catherine's. "She's perfect," he whispered, awestruck. "Catherine is asking for you," Mrs. Holloway added. "She did wonderfully, though she's exhausted, poor thing." Ethan carried his daughter into the bedroom, where Catherine lay propped against the pillows, her face pale but radiant with a joy that transcended her fatigue. When she saw Ethan holding the baby, tears filled her eyes. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" Catherine said softly. Ethan sat carefully on the edge of the bed, cradling the infant. The most beautiful thing I've ever seen, except for her mother. Catherine reached out to touch the baby's tiny hand. What shall we call her? They had discussed names but hadn't settled on one. Now, looking at the small, perfect face of their daughter, Ethan knew. Hope, he said. Her name is Hope. Catherine's smile was luminous. Hope Yates. It's perfect. She met Ethan's eyes. Thank you for giving us both a home, a future. Ethan leaned forward and kissed her forehead. Thank you for bringing Hope back into my life when I thought it was gone forever. Baby Hope grew strong and healthy, the joy of her parents' lives. Ethan doted on her, carrying her with him as he worked around the property once she was old enough. Catherine would watch from the porch as he showed the baby the horses, explaining everything to her as though she understood every word. By spring, Catherine had fully recovered from childbirth and had settled into motherhood with a natural grace. The cabin that had once seemed so sparse now felt like the warmest, most welcoming home she could imagine. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Hope sleeping peacefully in her cradle beside them, Ethan took Catherine's hand. Are you happy? He asked, his eyes searching hers. Catherine smiled, squeezing his fingers. Happier than I ever thought possible. Are you? I have everything I need right here, he answered, his gaze moving from her face to their sleeping daughter. More than I ever dreamed of having. Even with all the complications? Catherine asked, thinking of her father's disownment, Porter's threats, the baby who had come into their lives under such unusual circumstances. Ethan lifted her hand to his lips. Life is complicated, Catherine, but love, real love, makes it simple. He smiled. When I saw you that first day, wounded and desperate, something told me my life was about to change forever. I just didn't know how completely or how wonderfully. When you sat beside me and told me I wasn't alone anymore, Catherine said softly, it was the first time in my life I truly believed I could be safe, be loved for who I am, not what someone wanted me to be. Ethan wrapped his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close as they watched the last rays of sunlight paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. You'll never be alone again, he promised, not as long as I have breath in my body. As twilight deepened into night, the little family remained on the porch, surrounded by the peaceful sounds of the wilderness that had once seemed so imposing to Catherine, but now felt like protection, a natural barrier between them and the troubles of the wider world. In the distance, a wolf howled, and Hope stirred slightly in her cradle. Catherine reached down to soothe her, marveling at the perfect smallness of her daughter's features. What do you think she'll be like when she grows up? She asked Ethan. He smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way that always made Catherine's heart beat faster. Strong like her mother, stubborn too, I expect. And kind like her father, Catherine added. With his steady heart and gentle hands. She'll be her own person, Ethan said thoughtfully, and we'll love her for exactly who she is. Catherine leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. From desperate flight to profound love, from fear to security, from loneliness to family, her journey had been unpredictable and often painful, but had led her exactly where she was meant to be. I love you, Ethan Yates, she whispered, his arm tightened around her. And I love you, Catherine Yates, now and always. As stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky, they sat together. A family forged not by blood, but by choice and love, a love that had begun when a frightened woman had hidden from her family's wrath, and a cowboy had sat beside her and said, You're not alone now. Years passed, and the Yates family thrived. Ethan's horse breeding business grew successful enough that they were able to build a larger home adjacent to the original cabin, which they kept as a reminder of their beginnings. Hope grew into a spirited, intelligent girl with her mother's green eyes and her father's quiet determination. When Hope was 3, Catherine gave birth to a son they named Daniel, who had Ethan's storm-colored eyes and a laugh that could brighten even the darkest day. 2 years later, twin girls joined the family, Elizabeth and Margaret, identical in appearance but as different in temperament as night and day. Through it all, Catherine and Ethan's love deepened and strengthened. The threats from Senator Porter never materialized into action. They later learned he had died of a stroke the year after their confrontation. Harold Coleman maintained his disownment of Catherine, but she found she didn't miss the coldness and control that had defined her childhood home. Instead, she and Ethan created the warm, loving family she had always longed for. Their home became known throughout the region for its hospitality, their dinner table often surrounded by friends, neighbors, and travelers passing through. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they watched their children playing in the meadow where Catherine had once collapsed, bleeding and desperate, Ethan took her hand. "Any regrets?" he asked. Catherine shook her head, her eyes following hope as she taught her younger siblings how to make daisy chains. "Not one. Every step of the journey led me here, to you and our children." "How could I regret that?" Ethan's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "Sometimes I still can't believe how lucky I am, that you found your way to my door that day." "It wasn't luck," Catherine said softly. "It was destiny." As the sun set on another day in the life they had built together, Catherine leaned against her husband's shoulder, surrounded by the sounds of their children's laughter. From the terror of that desperate flight to the profound joy of the present, her life had transformed completely. And it had all begun when she was at her lowest point, when a woman hid from her family's wrath, and a cowboy sat beside her and said, "You're not alone now." Words that had proven true every day since.